You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel. I'm the president and founder of the California Rock Art Foundation. And what we do is we identify, evaluate, manage, and conserve rock art both in Alta California and in Baja California. We conduct field trips, we have trainings, exercise, we do research, and in every way possible, we try to preserve, protect, and coordinate treasures of Alta and Baja California rock art, of which there are many and diverse. We also work closely with Native Americans and partner with them to recognize and protect sacred sites. So for more info about the fabulous California Rock Art Foundation, you can go to carockart.org. Also, I'm open to give me a call, 805-312-2261. We would welcome sponsorship or underwriting, helping us to defray the costs of our podcasts, and also membership in California Rock Art Foundation. And of course, donations, since we are a 501c3 nonprofit scientific and educational corporation. God bless everyone out there in podcast land.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Hello out there in Archaeology Podcast land. This is your host for episode 119, Dr. Alan Garfinkel. We have a real treat for you this time. We've discovered a new panel of rock art that is just endlessly engaging. It's on the eastern skirt of the Sierras, and it is a package of unbelievable imagery that will be enticing and mesmerizing.
Welcome to the show, everybody. If you're hearing my voice, Chris Webster, that means that Alan and I are talking about something cool. So, Alan, what are we talking about today?
Well, Chris, I've been kicking around the COSOs for about 50 years now and seen thousands and thousands of images of rock art. It's one of the densest areas of rock art in the entire Western Hemisphere. There's supposed to be about 200,000 individual instances of rock art. But I hadn't gone to a site called the Portuguese Bench, which is very well known. It's a site that the Archaeological Institute has acquired. It was excavated in part by David S. Whitley, who's one of the most prestigious rock art professionals in all the land. And they excavated a village site on the eastern skirt of the Sierras, and it was mainly of the Newberry period, goes from about 2000 BC to about circa AD 1. And I heard that there was a rock art panel there. I said, I'd love to see that rock art panel, see what it is. Mm-hmm. Well, they showed it to me, and I was gobsmacked. It's an enormous panel of granite that juts out of the ground. It's big as hell, and it's covered with imagery, but you couldn't see it very well. It's on granite, which is very unusual. So we took a bunch of pictures of it. We gave it to a specialist to work up and post-process, and the more he studied it, the more interesting it got. And it ended up being probably one of the most outstanding panels of imagery I've ever seen, and the one that is certainly has some of the most supernatural content and, I would say, metaphorically significant cosmological elements that I've ever seen packed into one panel. So I thought it would be worthy to talk a little bit about it and explain why this particular panel may be rather important.
Yeah, check this out in the show notes. So we've got a copy of this picture in there, and it's really a drawing of the panel that was done. And we'll put some attribution and some credits down there in the show notes. But take a look at it, because while we're talking about this, you're really going to want to see it. So, but I've seen, and I know you have too, but I've seen some panels with a lot of different things on it, right? A lot of different motifs. And the cool thing about this one is there's so many different things on it, right? There's not like one common thing or common thread or even common style throughout this panel. There's just so many things going on here that you really just got to sit and take it in.
It's a very diverse panel. It has every possible iconographic, would you call it metaphorical, indexical, instrument that I've seen in the COSOs for the last 50 years, all arrayed on this panel. We put together a book that you've heard a lot about, that we spent a couple of years putting together, and it's all about the serpent as a vehicle or an indexical animal or semiotic metaphor to understand the cosmological significance and the thread that goes through from the most ancient Uto-Aztecan people all the way through from Eastern California to the American Southwest to the high cultures of Mexico. And that was just put out by Bergen. It's called The Iconicity of the Uto-Aztecans. It's by Tirtha Mukhopadhyay and myself. And the reason I talk about that is this panel is full of snakes and serpents, literally full. You look at it. How many snakes are there? Oh, my word. They're all over the panel, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that's unusual about the panel is of all the images I've seen of snakes in the Cosos, they usually are shown in association alongside of some sort of a animal human figure, let's say. I've only seen it, I think, 2 other times where they're actually in a particular figure's hand, right? Or mouth, just twice. In all the thousands and thousands of panels I've seen.
Really?
This one has it once, twice, even 3 times, it looks like. They're holding the snake in their hand.
Yeah, they are.
And you can tell what kind of snakes these are because I've learned from snake experts that when you have these triangular heads on those snakes, they are the poisonous snakes, the famous rattlesnakes, rather than the bull snake or any other kind of snake. These are the venomous ones, the ones that'll poison and can potentially kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, I see at least 3, and possibly the figure on the top might be holding 2 snakes, but it's probably something smaller like a staff or a stick because it's, or even a bone. It almost looks like a femur that the top one is holding in his other hand.
Well, the interesting thing about that topmost figure, he or she, I think it's a she, has human-like qualities. The feet are human. The torso is human. It's a solid-bodied figure.
I see
but
it.
the face is a star. I have never, ever seen a face as a star anywhere in the Cosos. Anywhere. Never. Never.
And I think it might be a male figure too, because there's no detail in the chest, but I'm pretty sure it has genitals. I'm not really sure.
Right. Now, if you look very closely at the genitals, it's an inverted U, and that's a uterus, and that's a female. And in fact, if you look at all 3 of those figures, they have something there in their, in the genital package that would lead us. Sometimes they call it a pudenda or a pudendum. Anyways, most likely those are all 3 are females.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I say that is not given that these are so informative. It's that I'm finishing up a multi-year study of, all of these decorated animal human figures throughout the Cosos. We've classified them. We've analyzed them to death, by the way. And it runs that almost 3 or 4 to 1 feminine versus masculine. The feminine figures are overwhelmingly exemplified during this period of time, and they have the decorated torsos rather than the solid bodies. And those solid bodies come in a little bit later, and in a big way, they become men. That's when the men come in. Interesting.
Yeah. One of the other figures that's in here looks like it's drawn inside of another animal.
It is.
Right in the center.
It is. Yes.
That's crazy.
Yes.
I've never seen
that either. That's a first for me.
Yeah.
I think that's either it could be a bobcat, it could be a cougar, it could be a mountain lion, it could be a wolf or something like that. The figure above it is definitely a mountain lion. They usually show them with very, very long and extended tails, and the rounded ends of their legs, those little club-like feet, the little circular feet are sort of a clue to that. But that little figure, the little diminished figure that's inside of the other animal is rather unique. There are bighorn sheep all throughout the whole figure, but most of them are not classic Coso in style. They're a little bit earlier, and all the non-Coso ones are moving from right to left, And the two Coso ones are moving from left to right. There's a Coso bighorn sheep off to the right, and there's one you can just see ever so slightly, sort of just to the right of that mountain lion up at the top. And it's got that classic bifurcated front-facing look to it. And you could miss it very easily. I did several times before it jumped out and bit me. But it's got stars all over it, which I haven't seen ever anywhere else in terms of the stars. It's got the projectile points that we keep talking about, the Elko, the series projectile points, those ones that are diagnostic of that period, the Newberry period from 2000 BC to AD 1. It's also got a foot in the very center of it. And I write about the foot, and it's a fertility sign, this foot thing. There's it's prominent in the sort of indigenous cosmology to talk about feet as having sort of a reproductive symbolism gig. It's even in the Bible, by the way, when they talk about a association, they said she spent the night at his feet. That's the line that it says to sort of avoid talking about the other element. But it's a foot turning into a projectile point turning into a foot, and the projectile point is emanating these rays, these power lines, as you call them, right? Yeah.
That projectile point looking thing that looks like a foot turning into a projectile point. You're totally right. To the right of that, there is another foot that looks more obviously like a foot above the the kind of deformed picture of a person or something like that. But what gets me is the animal underneath all of that, the horn coming off of that animal is attached. It goes right up through on a line, right up to the foot that's in the center of it. I mean, that looks like it was an element of the drawing, not some sort of feature of the rock.
No, it is. It's a connection. And again, I know I can beat a dead horse, but this particular panel screams to me the issues of fertility and reproduction and resurrection and renewal. And the part of that is this obsession with snakes that had to do with their losing of their skin, where they shed their skin and they come back again. And part of the ancient Uto-Aztecan and even the actual, classic high cultures of Mexico had a fascination or an obsession with snakes, having to do with the resurrection theme, the theme of death and life, life and death. When one opens up an individual and looks inside of them, of course, you see the veins, the arteries, and the elements of the stomach, and they all look like snakes. And so this kinship of energetics, and vitality coming from these snake-like organs was something that was part of the cosmology of the indigenous people in the high cultures of Mexico.
All right. With that, let's take a break and we'll come back on the other side and continue talking about this amazing panel. Don't forget to check it out in the show notes so you can follow along with what we're saying. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Rock Art Podcast, episode 119. And we are talking about a fascinating panel that was recently discovered in California near the Coso Range. And again, look down in your show notes if you haven't done so already and pull up an image of this, because it is just fascinating what you see, all the different elements when you're looking at it. And one of the things that struck me as we were kind of going to break a little bit was in the bottom right-hand corner, there's two things that are interesting to me. One is the apparent star, and it's like a 5-pointed star like we would draw as a child, and it looks like there might be even some things coming down from it, almost like it's like shooting stars, like traces or something like that. And they're all kind of coming down on top of this human figure that has what looks like a cross in its head. And I know a cross symbol is not unique to Christianity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just a symbol. It's just a drawing, but it's really interesting, this whole group of elements here.
So the biggest figure in the panel is down at the base. The smallest figure is up at the top. The top figure, besides having a face as a star, has a wand and is holding a snake, either holding one snake or even have another snake, and there's multiple snakes. They have snakes that look like lightning and that end in projectile points, And that, again, is something that's very characteristic of the Uto-Aztecan cultures, the Pueblos in the Southwest, the Hopi, the Zuni, and the high cultures of even Mexico. And they see these projectile points raining down from these supernatural beings, these gods and goddesses. And they see them as inseminating elements that they would go down into the earth and fructify or create new life. You see what I mean? It's like rain.
Yeah.
It's rain, it's lightning, it's a projectile point, and all of these things are piercing this Mother Earth metaphor and growing plants, causing life to ascend. How's that?
You know, you just said something that just made me think because, and I never really thought about this before, but I'd never really looked at the snakes and things like that where were drawn in this detail. These ones that clearly have like diamond-shaped heads representing the diamond-shaped nature of the rattlesnake. There's definitely snakes out here in the West that have that shape. And I know that those snakes don't exist all over the world, but I wonder if just in some places, the triangular shaped nature of the deadly projectile point is mimicked after the triangle shape of the deadly snakehead. Right? The way that it strikes at its prey.
I have never thought about that, but I'm sure that metaphorically, and now, an analogy again, you've got the projectile point form of the rattlesnake and the projectile point form of the points, the darts and the arrow points, and they mirror one another. Additionally, the lightning strikes, that crash of thunder and that bolt of lightning is mimicked by the rattle of the rattlesnake and that hissing noise that they make, and then the strike of the rattlesnake's bite, where they rear back and then they bite you. So that was seen as lightning. That was another analogous, a metaphor for lightning.
Right.
And of course, the lightning, the thunder, the rain, those are all the most heavenly and ethereal and celestial elements coming from the sky, right? But then you've got that paired with an animal that lives and works and ruminates. Its habitat is the ground, is on the ground and under the ground. So you've got a unification from the highest realm to the lowest realm. Yeah. So I mean, there's a thing called the journey of ascent and descent, and I've talked about it in my papers, and it's one of the cycles that are depicted in rock art and also in the cosmology, etc. Native people see the world as cyclical, and they see the connections between the heavenly circuit to the terrestrial circuit, and it's a big, huge wheel that continues to go and grow as we move through our lives and as we begin to understand the nature of things. They're always looking for those kinds of connections, those kinds of relationships, the principles of reciprocity. That's what interfingers in everything about Native culture. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, they were so connected and, tuned to the land and their surroundings that, that only makes sense. I mean, to a degree that there's no way we could ever truly understand a panel like this and the symbolism involved. I mean, we may be guessing at some things based on, of course, ethnographic evidence, but yeah, how close are we? I wonder.
Well, that's the thing. There's a woman, her name is Carolyn Boyd. She wrote a book on the white shaman panel. It's in the Pecos section, the Pecos River, there in South Texas. And the whole book is deconstructing a single panel of rock art. And she argues that she can, in fact, understand or deconstruct this very complex panel because it demonstrates or it creates or communicates the creation narrative of the Huichol and of the Nahua people. And it won the 2005 award for the best new book for the Society for American Archaeology. So using ethnographic analogy, using a deep time understanding, linguistics, and also examining, cross-culturally the nature of these symbols, I think we can at least approach some sort of a distant understanding of some of the communications that this kind of panel or this kind of esoterica is really telling us. I don't think we got it right. I don't think we even got it close to right, but
Right.
we may be asking the right questions. How's that?
Yeah, possibly. And, speaking of questions, I've got a lot of questions about the big dude down on the bottom here, because just the wavy, almost ethereal nature of this being, and then this kind of line that goes across at its neck, shoulders. I don't know, because he's got like a point, like a dotted head, like it's almost like, like somebody who's almost high on drugs. Like that's how your head would feel. Well, and then he's got a snake in one hand,
yep,
like a plant in the other.
Right, and that plant is probably the visual shorthand for a bighorn sheep. That head thing there, that's what they use in the Cosos everywhere to show bighorn sheep. You've got one of them upwards in the right, with the two dots under the horns. See, there it is again. It's a visual shorthand for the bighorn sheep horns.
Yeah.
It means bighorn sheep, and you're exactly right that particular individual, if we use the shamanistic model, the explanatory platform, would be under altered states of consciousness. And that's how you feel when you're taking psychotropics. You lose all sense of who you are. You meld into other things. You feel as though you're part of the universe. Your head is gone, right? And your whole body, like it's melting away. And that's what it's showing.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that before.
No, and I hadn't either. It's very representational. It's very indicative. Now, at that ethereal individual's foot, right, on the rightmost foot, right above there, there's a thing that looks like it's sort of like a safety pin. That sort of inverted U.
Yeah.
That is the symbol that's being used all over the Great Basin for our famous wing trap. The wing traps, remember the wing traps we talked about that they use to shuttle the bighorn sheep to kill them? That's what that is. It's exactly that simple. Yeah.
Wow.
That's at the Parowan Gap. That's at Nine Mile Canyon. That is the symbol that they use to show that they are cordoning off and assembling a hunting party to kill antelope, bighorn sheep, deer, some sort of big game animal. Isn't that amazing?
Wow, that is amazing. All right, let's take one more break and then spend a little more time talking about this panel.
Okay.
Yeah. We need to take a minute to think about this and give everybody else a chance to think about it. And then we'll come back on the other side and keep talking about it. Back in a minute.
You got it.
Welcome back to the Rock Art Podcast, episode 119. We're talking about this fascinating panel. Again, look down in your show notes and find an image of it. I want to talk about two things. The first one is the animal that is probably the lower animal and kind of in the center, and it's next to the kind of shamanistic figure and by the safety pin, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's got sort of a U-shaped indentation with a very clear line that was carved specifically into it right in the center. Does that represent like a wound or femininity or something like that?
Probably represents a womb. Not a wound, but a womb. W-O-M-B. And, again, penetrating and indicating that this is more about fertility and about the, reconnection of animals with growth and abundance and reproduction. You mentioned this, that, all their tails are up or parallel to the ground, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what does that mean, Doctor? It
means they're ready to receive. They're fertile.
Yeah. they're open for reproduction, open for business. So God bless them. Yeah. And that's what we found when we talked to the wildlife biologists who tell us that only during the rut period, when the females are in estrus, do they wag their tails, and they certainly are in an upwards motion, demonstrating their availability for fertility and reproduction. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the last things I want to talk about, which is something I've literally just recognized, is that wand that's in the uppermost figure appears in the Cosos many times, about half a dozen different times. And it's kind of a bifurcated, pointed wand that looks like it's almost like a divining stick, like a Y, shaped like a Y. And I always wondered about that. And it turns out that Bernard Jones identified and described those kinds of wands. And they said they talked to a Hopi elder. And the Hopi are a Uto-Aztecan isolate out in the American Southwest. And it's one of the oldest continuously and most conservative group that we've got there that retain their sort of archaic religious metaphors unchanged.
Wow.
And so they said, oh, that wand, we use that, during our sun ceremonies. And also it represents the balance of the universe, the good, the bad, the old, the new, the young, the fresh, the disabled. And it helps us to understand more about the cosmic nature of our, celestial sphere. And the people that hold those are our sun watchers. Oh, really? Who are they? Well, they're the people that watch the movement of the sun and tell us when the sun stops its movements in the heavens, and we have to pray and ask our creator gods to get the energy of the sun to, move ahead and go back on its travels and pick it up and not have it stand still anymore and move again and, keep the universe going.
Right.
It's a time of world renewal, and it's a very dark time and a very serious time when we have to do that because, we're holding life in the balance. If the sun doesn't move, we're not going to be able to live. Mm-hmm. So that's called the winter solstice. That's about the time of Christmas, about December 21st to December 25th. And if you look at the sun in the sky, it's a time when for 3 or 4 or 5 days, it literally sits in the same location in the sky.
Right. Wow.
So there's one right there. And then this panel is very unusual because it has so much of a celestial and sky and night sky sort of appearance to it. There's stars, there's trails, there's all this other stuff going on here that sort of has a much more cosmic flavor to it than anything I've ever seen in the Cosos.
Yeah.
The only other place I've seen that kind of emphasis was at Mary's Cave. And Mary's Cave is the place where they actually have demonstrated that is an observatory for the movement of the sun. And that they have a horizon marker during the winter solstice that is directly across from that viewing point. And an astronomer spent the better part of 20 years proving or demonstrating that was in fact the case. Wow.
One of the other things I wanted to make sure we get in here, because you mentioned it a little bit, I think at the beginning as just an element, but the center, one of the center things here is the projectile point foot thing that has these lines radiating out from it. And you call them power lines, and they really do look like some sort of, sci-fi movie where some sort of electricity is coming off of something.
Right. If you read the current ethnography from the native people of Namak Uto-Aztecan background, they will tell you that the central principle of one of their cosmic elements, a hallmark of their religion, is the concept of puha or buha, that everything has power. It's electricity. It's an engine that keeps things moving and connected and powerful and cosmic and sacred, and all of that all wrapped up together. And so the spiritual energy can be accessed only by those that, open themselves up to these realms of non-ordinary reality because they can't be seen or sensed otherwise. So the way you can do that is by altered states of consciousness, not necessarily using drugs or other things, but you can do it through, chanting, drumming, from just arduous exercise, from gazing in the mountains. There's all kinds of different ways to do this, but it's akin to some of our religious practitioners who pray and then receive and move into this ethereal realm and feel like they're one with the universe.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's so much to take in.
And if you've ever taken drugs like I have, way back in the 1960s, and you've done sort of, psychotropic stuff, not LSD, but what's the other one? The psilocybin. You see those power lines, and you see those shafts when you move your hand. There's a trail that is visible, and the colors are intensified. Anyways,
wow.
So as though people that open themselves up to this other reality, this alternative state of the universe, are provided with a bit of a picture, a different sense than conventional folks that, don't do crazy things like that.
Right. All right. Well, one last thing here as we're wrapping this up. I'm just wondering if you've heard of any preliminary analysis on the actual morphology of this thing and how it's been constructed, and to see if they think a lot of this was put together at about the same time, or if they're elements drawn on top of each other and possibly at many different times. And this is a drawing that we're looking at, so it's hard to tell from this angle, but it all looks pretty fresh and like it was drawn at the same time.
I would argue that most of it is very fresh, and it was done in a singular or extended foray into assembling these elements. I think that some of them may have been added a little bit later, but I'd say that 95% of them were ensconced during a singular or extended period of production. That's what I would believe.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, any final thoughts on this panel, Doctor? This is pretty fascinating.
Pretty outrageous. It's an example of this endlessly engaging exercise that I'm involved in. I think it helps one to sort of get a sense of some of the things we talked about. We had a couple of discussions about Amerindian perspectivism, and this certainly espouses it with all the variability and all the connections that are made between humankind and animals and celestial bodies, all interacting in a mosaic, and an interactive one at that.
Wow.
If one wanted to better understand the native theology, I think if you stared at this panel long enough, you might get a glimmer of what that's like.
Wow. All right. Well, I think with that, we will wrap it up. I mean, if you got any questions, send them in. Contact info is in the show notes, but definitely take a look at this image and just see what you think about the images and what you can make of some of this stuff and what you think it might mean, because you can't do any worse than we're probably doing right now, because it's hard to say sometimes. So definitely take a look.
See you in the flip-flop, gang.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.